Everyone in Pine Hollow warned the young widow that the chain gang escapee was part wolf, part storm, and all trouble. They said he had spent too long in the high Ozark ridges, speaking only to thunder and wild hogs living off roots and the memories of men he'd buried. They said his stare could curdle milk and his silence could hollow out a church pew. Yet on the sweltering morning, the county sheriff hauled him into town, shackled barefoot, beard matted like moss. Evelyn Burke stepped out of the crowd and bought his work contract for the price of a single silver dollar. The townsfolk gasped, the blacksmith spat, and the preacher crossed himself because everyone knew a dollar wasn't enough to feed a ghost, let alone bind a monster. Still, when she led him away, he turned once, locked eyes with her, and in a voice that sounded like rusty hinges, whispered 6 words no one else could hear, words that hit her heart like an anvil and made her wonder if the dead truly stayed buried on Burke Ridge. July 1933, Pine Hollow, Arkansas. Ozark's Sheriff Otis Rawlins always said the courthouse steps smelled like cedar shavings and bad decisions. On that July morning, both were ripe in the air. Heat shimmered above the dusty road. Cicadas screamed from the sycamores, and a ragged semicircle of townsfolk gathered to watch the auction of Caleb Quinn, a man rumored to have snapped an iron trap with his bare hands and knelt beside dying deer to hear what last secrets they might tell. The sheriff's deputies propped a warped signboard against Quinn's chest. County labor lease, $1 minimum. It had taken 3 rifles and a bellyful of luck to drag him down from Devil's Backbone Ridge after he'd stolen a Winchester from a timber survey crew. No blood spilled, the sheriff admitted, but Quinn had vanished into the pines as if the hills themselves swallowed him, and the county coffers wouldn't fund a trial. Cheaper to lease his muscle for the summer than feed him through winter in a jail already packed with moonshiners and drifters. Whispers fluttered, too dangerous, too wild, might chew through a plow yoke before lunchtime. Yet no one bid, until she arrived. Evelyn Burke, widowed 10 months, black dress, faded but pressed, moved like quiet resolve through the crowd. She was 24 and looked older, grief having chiseled shadows beneath her hazel eyes. People shifted, muttering. Poor girl lost her husband in the dynamite slide at Collier Quarry, someone hissed. Must have cracked her mind to be here. She ignored them, ascended the steps, and faced Sheriff Rawlins. How much her voice trembled, but didn't break. Otis scratched his gray stubble. Ma'am, the opening bid is $1, but she pressed a single Morgan silver into his palm. Quinn's chains jingled. He stood barefoot on the planks, shoulders roped with muscle scar running from ear to collarbone like a lightning strike. His eyes, pale green, rimmed with feral gold, lifted to hers. And that was when he spoke the first words since capture, so soft that only Evelyn heard, "Can't lose the light again." Her knees nearly buckled. The phrase had belonged to Owen Burke, her late husband, whispered in her ear the night the quarry collapsed. Eve can't lose the light again. No one else had ever heard it. Evelyn knotted the rope loosely about Quinn's wrist gently, as if tethering a half-wild colt, and led him down Main Street. Spectators gawked, a few snickered. Reverend Morrow murmured a startled prayer. Quinn walked in silence, not resisting footfalls soundless, despite the gravel. They passed the churchyard, where Owen's headstone rested under a dogwood, then crossed the wooden bridge over Burke Creek to the homestead, a clapboard house, sagging barn, 40 acres of half-worked pasture, and a garden that had turned to weeds after her loss. She pointed him to the loft above the barn, laid a bedroll, and left a tin cup of water. He did not speak again. That night, thunderheads bruised the horizon. Evelyn relit the kerosene lamp 3 times, a heart clanging. She almost convinced herself the phrase had been a heat-struck hallucination, until she looked out and saw him in the yard, head tipped skyward, as if memorizing the constellations her husband once traced on summer nights. She slept little. At dawn, the tin cup sat empty beside the door, and fresh split hickory was stacked by the stove, neat, exact the way Owen used to do. 3 nights later, the storm arrived like a freight train in the dark. Wind howled through the rafters. Rain lashed sideways. Shutters banged like rifle shots. Evelyn rushed outside to save the laundry line, skirts whipping. Lightning forked, searing white. Suddenly, Quinn was there, appearing from the blackness, seizing her waist, hauling her under the porch overhang, A heartbeat before a cottonwood branch crashed where she'd stood. His beard dripped rain. Eyes blazed wild. "Fool woman," he rasped. She tried to shove him away, but he held fast, breath hot with wood smoke and fear. Then softer, almost reverent, "Can't lose you too?" The words punched air from her lungs, exactly as Owen had gasped beneath the quarry rubble when she crawled to him, words never repeated. "What did you say?" she whispered. Quinn's pupils flickered confused as though surprised by his own voice. He stepped back into the downpour and vanished between curtain sheets of rain. She didn't sleep. At sunrise, he'd mended the loosened roof shakes and left a bowl of venison stew on her table without a sound. Days slid into an uneasy rhythm. He chopped wood-repaired fences, tilled the ruined garden, with a patience that belied the scars on his knuckles. He spoke no more than a dozen words, yet each echoed something personal. A folk tune. Owen hummed the precise knot her husband used to lash fence wire, the exact place Owen hid spare matches under the porch plank. It was as though the mountain man carried fragments of another life's shards of light glinting through cracks in his memory. One evening under bruised purple dusk, Evelyn found him kneeling in the sunflower patch behind the barn, her private place of mourning. He lifted a single wilted head, fingers gentle. "You dream things that ain't yours," she asked, voice brittle. He nodded once. Names cries a cradle rocking empty. Her palm flew to her mouth. She had buried the cradle, Owen's last gift, in the eastern field soil salted by her tears. No soul alive knew. "Who are you?" she wanted to scream, but the wind answered instead, rattling dry stalks like bones. August heat settled thick. Sheriff Rawlins rode out each week to ensure the labor lease was lawful. Each week he left scratching his head at how orderly Burke Ridge had become. But trouble found them anyway, delivered in the mouth of a scented envelope bearing the seal of Ozark Timber and Milling Co. The letter, penned by company agent Luther Vaughn, declared intention to purchase rights to harvest old-growth white oak on Burke Ridge, particularly the eastern swale, where mineral assays hinted at limestone fit for quarrying. Generous compensation offered. Refusal would trigger eminent domain hearings. Evelyn's hands shook as she burned the letter in the stove. That swale cradled the buried cradle. She would die before axes touched it. Quinn watched her, unreadable. "By lantern glow," he said, "land can be saved. How they've lawyers and rifles. I'll find proof their survey's false." At dawn, he limped off barefoot, carrying only jerky and Owen's weather-stained deed. He returned 2 days later with torn shirt, fevered eyes, and a ledger page copied in pencil boundary stakes, misplaced by 30 yards. The cradle lay safe. Relief was brief. That same night, Vaughn arrived on horseback, flanked by 2 suited men. He tipped his hat with a viper's smile. "Evenin', Mrs. Burke. Here tell you're harboring a fugitive. Name's Caleb Quinn, escaped the Tuscane work farm last winter, wanted for assault. Sheriff might overlook it, unless you keep your land." Evelyn trembled. Quinn appeared in the doorway, shoulder bandaged from his trek. Vaughn's grin widened. One word and the federal marshals ride. Quinn stepped forward, voice gravel cold. "Leave before the creek rises red." Vaughn's hand hovered near his revolver, but he backed away, spitting chaw into the dirt. Clock's ticking, widow. When they were gone, Evelyn turned to Quinn. "Is any of it true? I ran," he admitted. "But I never hurt the girl they said I did. Why didn't you tell me? Didn't know if I was man or memory." His eyes shimmered like bottled stormlight. "But I know this, I won't let them take what yours." That night, thunder rolled distant again, echoing the drum of hooves in Evelyn's chest. The summer dusk lay heavy over Pine Hollow, a velvet quilt stitched with the drone of katydids and the resin-sharp scent of pitch pines. On the Burke porch, Evelyn trimmed the last of the lantern wicks and tried not to stare at the empty horizons. Hours earlier, the twins, little Jesse and James, had chased fireflies beneath the willow, laughing as if barns never burned and widows never stood between gunmen and their door. Now they slept in the loft curls, damp with night sweat, firmly instructed not to stir, even if thunder shook the rafters. Caleb Quinn emerged from the barn's charred skeleton as the first stars pricked open, carrying 2 crates that clinked ominously. Evelyn's pulse skipped. "Are those dynamite?" he said, setting the crates on the porch boards with reverence usually reserved for hymnals. 23 sticks. Owen stored them under the smokehouse behind salt hams. "Fuses are dry. Powder still sweet. She managed a shaky smile. You smell like cordite Mr. Quinn, better than Pinkerton cologne. He unpacked the sticks with careful fingers, cut fuses, crimped blasting caps. Each movement looked absurdly gentle for a man who could snap a yoke beam over his knee. Evelyn fetched a tin cup of chicory coffee, watching his profile in lamplight, scar-tracking, jawline eyes bright as damp emerald. Caleb, she asked softly. Are you afraid he slid a fuse through a cap? Every minute since the day the hills spit me out. But fear keeps the hands from shaking most days. Lightning flickered far west, silent yet. Distant heat storm. Evelyn hugged her shawl tight. My husband used to carry fear like a candle. Said it only lights the way if you cup it right. Caleb's shoulders rose, fell. Good man, he was. But he never faced corporations with private guns. Caleb's gaze found hers, nor widows with dynamite. At 11:30, the bridge groaned in the valley. Lanterns shimmered between trees, throwing antler shapes across the trunks. Evelyn's stomach pinched. Sweat cooled on her spine. Caleb racked Owen's 12-gauge and passed her the Winchester he'd cleaned that afternoon. Load 4. Chamber empty till you aim. Kicks a mule. They killed the porch lamp and melted into shadows, Evelyn behind the woodpile. Caleb crouched beside the stone spring house that once chilled milk. Thick, August, dark-wrapped barn ruins, but glowing cinders still breathed beneath sagging beams, a hell-mouth reminders of Vaughn's malice. Hoofbeats slowed. 3 riders. 1 lantern. Saddles creaked. Spread out barked Luther Vaughn, his sharp salesman voice unmistakable. Find the girl, and mind the trees mountain man prowls. Evelyn's pulse drummed in her ears. She saw the glint of steel at the rider's hips, the polished handle of a coach gun across a saddle. She breathed through her nose the way Owen taught her while target shooting at tin cans, slow level exact. The rear rider dismounted, leading his horse toward the garden. Caleb flowed from blackness, pressing twin barrels of the scattergun to the man's spine. The thunk of gunmetal against ribs sounded louder than thunder. Evenin', Caleb growled. Folks sleepin'. He stripped the man's pistol, shoved him forward. A second later, the lantern swung, and still Vaughn hadn't seen them. Evelyn Rose cocked the Winchester and deliberately shot the ground 6 inches from Vaughn's boots. Dust exploded, lantern jerked, the horse reared. Vaughn cried out as the light flew, smashed and hissed into darkness. Hands, Evelyn shouted, stepping into moonshine. Make a dust sparkled in the air like malevolent fireflies. The Pinkerton nearest Vaughn drew steel. Caleb fired. The 12-gauge boomed like God pronouncing sentence. The slug chewed through the man's shoulder, spun him to earth. Sparks cascaded from the barn ember pile as pellets ricocheted. Vaughn froze, palms up, face ghost white under brim. Easy, widow. Easy ended when you burned my barn, his tongue flicked. Insurance, that's all. Force a negotiation. Negotiate with the devil yourself, she said. The rifle's front sight glittered over Vaughn's heart. Mount up. Ride out. Next time I aim, honest. Vaughn swallowed, hauled the wounded man across the saddle, whistled to the disarmed thug. They wheeled, clattered over the bridge, swallowed by cedar gloom. Silence fell dense, ringing. Caleb's chest rose and fell fast. Spent shells smoked at his feet. Evelyn let herself tremble only after the hoof echoes died. He watched her with awe, equal parts pride and worry. You shook less than me, he said. I'll crumble later, she murmured. They doused the smoldering lantern glass, dragged the unconscious gunman to the smokehouse, and wrapped Caleb's grazed bicep. Somewhere a barred owl hooted unbothered by human mayhem. Near dawn, they sat on the porch steps, dynamite safely reboxed. Warm breeze tasted like hickory ash and adrenaline. Caleb said, almost shy, fierce candle. You cupped it good. Evelyn tipped her head to his shoulder. Somewhere inside, grief shifted, making space for courage she hadn't known she still possessed. Morning light peeled back night's bruises, revealing bullet-scarred porch posts, hoof-gouged earth, and a barn frame black as a charred ribcage. Sheriff Otis Rollins arrived at first, crow hat, askew pockets stuffed with legal forms and apology. He muttered curses at the sight, ordered the captive thug hauled to the county cell, and kicked embers until sparks crackled under his boot heel. Pinkertons without warrants in my jurisdiction, hell's bells. He thumbed sweat from his temple. But Vaughn's a slippery cuss. He'll spin this as trespass on their claim. Evelyn handed him the dynamite-scorched bullet she dug from a porch post. Claim that. The sheriff promised to do more digging of his own, but doubt scored his brow. A county badge had short reach against a timber conglomerate, flush with Depression-era cash. As he mounted to leave, Caleb stepped forward. "We'll fetch older truth," he said. "Something rock remembers, even if men lie." Rollins squinted. "You found a geology book all of a sudden." Caleb shook his head. "Found whispers in the pine line." They rode out at first dusk, Evelyn astride the mare she'd raised from a foal, Caleb behind on Widow McCabe's sturdy gray. The twins waved from the gate under McCabe's watchful eye. Jesse held a paper flag he'd colored with charcoal and pokeberries Burke Ridge, or bust scrawled crookedly. The image drilled into Evelyn's heart like a vow she would bring those boys a future, not overshadowed by corporate greed or bounty hunter rifles. The marble glass cavern yawned 3 miles up Devil's Backbone Mouth, occluded by sumac and Virginia creeper. Legend claimed the cave ran straight through the ridge that Blackfoot scouts once used its hidden exit to slip past Union patrols 80 years prior. Few locals ventured inside now. A flash flood in 21 drowned 2 fortune hunters searching for Spanish bullion. Evening sank into cool darkness as they tethered the horses at a white oak. Evelyn lit a carbide lamp. Its hiss and blue glow felt fragile against the throat-dark entrance. Water dripped in steady tempo music for the stone-blooded. Caleb hefted coil of hemp rope and offered his uninjured arm. "You can turn back." "I didn't haul dynamite for show," she said, patting the rucksack with blasting caps, a bluff maybe, but a comforting one. She squeezed past a curtain of spider-lace roots boots, landing in ankle-deep water, cold enough to bite. The lamp-haloed cathedral walls puckered with flowstone ridges. Crystals winked like underworld stars. They walked single file, breath misting. The ceiling lowered, forcing a crawl through a slot no wider than an apple crate. Caleb pushed the gear ahead, then wriggled, scar-brushing, slick limestone shoulder scraping. Evelyn followed, heartbeat in her mouth. Beyond the passage opened into a chamber big as a church nave. Water pooled black and silent, reflecting lamp flame, like devil glass. Stalactites hung sword keen. Bats rustled overhead. In the center rose the stalagmite, thicker than a cotton gin shaft, marbled with white spar. Caleb waded to it, lamp raised. Carved into mineral crust were symbols weathered but unmistakable. BR on one face, CQ on the other, an arrow showing true north. County Survey archives claim those initials marked the 1894 split between Burke Homestead and Collier Quarry. Evelyn pressed trembling fingers to the letters. Her grandfather Elias Burke had cut them with his own hand. Caleb produced vellum charcoal beeswax to seal against damp. He wrapped the stalagmite, rubbed until the glyphs mirrored onto sheet. Water shivered, distant echo boomed, rocks settling or omen. When the last line transferred, a low groan rippled overhead. Evelyn's lamp flickered. She looked up to see pebbles raining from stalactites. "Quake," she gasped. Maybe, Caleb said, rolling the parchment, or floodwater, shifting either way, time to go. They retraced steps, but the crawl slot now exhaled dusty drafts. Stone had cracked, narrowing the opening. Caleb squeezed, first dragging packs by a rope loop. Just as Evelyn pushed through, a slab sheared off overhead, slamming the floor with echoing thunder. A second rock slid, wedging between her hips and wall. Panic clawed. Lamp hissed out, plunging her into ink. "Eve," Caleb's voice pounded. She felt his hands search the darkness, bracing her rib cage, pulling. Muscles strained. A grunt tore from his throat. Finally, the rock shifted. She wriggled free, collapsing into his arms on the far side. Darkness complete. Water surged somewhere. Air felt scarcer. Caleb fumbled for matches. Sparks flared, found wick. Light bloomed, catching sweat and limestone dust on their faces. "Alternate shaft, north side," he muttered, studying the map in memory. They slogged deeper into uncharted corridor, winding toward a fetid breeze that hinted at daylight. Twice they dead-ended. Twice Caleb backtracked, never cursing, only murmuring, "Follow the cold." Cold leads out. Hours or minutes later, pale sky glimmered through a jagged crack above a talus slope. Caleb boosted Evelyn. She scrambled onto rock pile, hauled rope, anchored it to a cedar root jutting through the cliff. He swung up despite wounded arm, lamp clattering to moss below. They burst into late-night coolness. Moon crowned the ridge and valley fog glowed silver in ocean under starlight. Evelyn laughed, half sob, half hymn. Caleb wiped limestone mud from her cheek, eyes wide with wonder, as if seeing her for the first time. "Light's not lost," he whispered. She remembered Owen saying the same on their wedding night while fireflies danced above canebrake. Her chest ache blossomed into something new, half sorrow, half promise. They descended the ridge at dawn, legs rubbery. Smoke columns curled from Burke Ridge, thin black. Caleb handed Evelyn the parchment jaw setting. "Your land's on fire again." She spurred forward, tears turned to steel. Even before they cleared the orchards, the acrid tang of char hit their throats. The barn was now a twisted rib cage of beams, but flames licked the remaining hayrick. Embers popped like rifle caps. Widow McCabe hustled the twins toward the creek, skirts flapping. When she saw Evelyn, relief crumpled her to her knees. 3 men rode in, she sobbed. "Set fire," said Caleb, "belonged to them, left this." She thrust a paper, wanted Caleb Quinn, escapee reward, $200 alive, $100 dead, signed by Silas Crow, licensed bounty officer. A whistle sliced the air. Evelyn spun to see Crow himself on a dun quarter horse beyond the fence, coattails lifting like crow wings. He raised a hand gloved in kid leather. "Widow Burke, my condolences. But business calls." Caleb stepped forward, sling, holding his wounded shoulder, Winchester cradled in good arm. "Let the kids go and face me man to man." Crow chuckled, easy as Sunday gossip. "Pinkertons want you breathing barely. Torch persuaded me to quicken matters." He patted his rifle. "Come gentle, I'll treat 'em fair." Evelyn's fury flared hotter than burning hay. She marched to the dynamite crate, still on porch, grabbed 2 sticks, wrapped fuses together, and strode toward Crow. Caleb's eyes bulged. "Eve, if fire is persuasion," she shouted, holding the naked dynamite aloft. "I speak it fluently." Crow's horse sidestepped. He narrowed eyes. "Bluff." She struck a match on her boot heel. Flame-licked fuse. Crow swore, wheeled his mount. Caleb lunged, firing a warning shot. Crow's rifle clanged to earth. Horse bolted, rider clinging. Fuse sputtered. Caleb sprinted, snatched the dynamite, pinched out spark with wet fingers. He turned, shaking. "Woman, you almost blew us all to Missouri." Evelyn's lips shook from fury or adrenaline, she couldn't tell. "I couldn't watch him threaten the boys." Caleb pulled her into a fierce hug despite his injuries, his heart banging against hers like a war drum. Over his shoulder, she saw Widow McCabe shepherding the twins back toward the porch, panic morphing into awe at the widow wielding fire. They tied a lariat between 2 maples, tripping Crow's dun horse, an hour later when he crept back. The bounty man slammed into a sassafras trunk, breath gone. Caleb disarmed and hogtied him before the man could spit dust. They locked him in the stone springhouse, cold water to ankles, wrists lashed above head. When he came to dripping, Crow sneered through cracked lip. "You think rustic justice scares me?" Caleb crouched, candle flame dancing in his eyes. "You burned a child's hay fort," Collateral Crow rasped. "Pinkertons will claim the cost." Evelyn appeared behind Caleb, holding the limestone rubbing in a wax-sealed tube. "Pinkertons can't claim Burke Ridge. We've got rock testimony." Crow's gaze flicked to the tube. Greed lit his pupils. "That parchment's worth more than you know." "That's why you'll stay on ice till the sheriff returns," Caleb said. He wedged the springhouse door closed with a timber beam. Crow's curses muffled, blending with the burble of water. Evening bled into bruise-colored twilight. They bucket brigaded the hay fire until only smoke spiraled. Caleb improvised splints for 2 scorched chickens. Evelyn stitched his shoulder hands sure despite tremor. The twins fell asleep on the porch, soot-smudged cheeks against his uninjured knee. In the hush, crickets resumed their choir, as though barns hadn't burned twice in a week. Evelyn traced the parchment's coarse edge. "Caleb, when did you decide someone else's land mattered to you?" He brushed dust from Jesse's curls. "When I saw how you carried grief like it was stone you refused to drop. Made me think a man might set it down for you." Her throat tightened. "I thought grief was all I had left." He smiled crooked. "Looks like dynamite and limestone joined the party." She laughed, soft and surprised. Then her gaze drifted to the dark lane, where flames had glimmered earlier. Clouds inked the moon. A hush settled, a hush that felt less like peace and more like the moment before choir begins. Sheriff Rawlins thundered in close to dawn, hat askew, horse lathered. He skidded to a stop, waving a telegram. Vaughn's petition reached the circuit judge. He's riding with state militia. 40 men, 2 Gatlings due before sundown tomorrow. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Caleb lifted a sleeping twin, tucked the boy against his good shoulder, and met Rawlins's gaze with stone calm. Then we'll lay our truth on the ridge, before they crest it. Rawlins swallowed. I brought affidavits from Reverend Morrow and Doc Wilkins' statements on the Pinkerton arson, but court likes paper. He glanced at the parchment tube. You got enough ink to beat steel. I've got rock and dynamite. Evelyn said, fire in her chest. And a town that won't bow. Caleb squeezed her hand. Forever starts at sunrise, he murmured Owen's words reborn. She squeezed back, and in that pressure was covenant. They would drag truth into daylight, even if it drew blood on the way. Wind shook the late summer oaks like a choir of warning bells, while Pine Hollow huddled beneath a sky the color of tarnished steel. By dusk, every porch lamp in town burned with nervous flame. Whispers chased through mercantile aisles, and under church rafters, 40 militiamen, 2 Gatling guns, and Judge Coleman himself were bivouacked at Collier Quarry 3 miles southeast, plotting a dawn march to Burke Ridge. Inside Widow McCabe's parlor, the improvised war council fidgeted around her walnut table. Sheriff Otis Rawlins with his crisp affidavits, Reverend Elijah Morrow clutching a ragged Bible, Doc Wilkins sharpening his spectacles as if lenses could slice red tape, 4 ranchers whose pastures bordered Evelyn's property and who knew Vaughn's arson threat might creep across fences, and of course Evelyn and Caleb shoulder to shoulder, bruised soot-smudged hands linked beneath the table where no one could see. Evelyn unrolled the limestone rubbing weighting its corners with crockery. The vellum crackled like distant musketry. Inked against beeswax seal glimmered the century-old initials B, R, and CQ. The judge will call this hearsay unless the stone itself walks into the courtroom, Reverend Morrow fretted. It will, Caleb said, voice low as a cave echo. Every head swiveled to him. Doc Wilkins arched a brow. You plan on dragging an 8-foot stalagmite down the mountain if that's what truth costs. Sheriff Rawlins rubbed the bridge of his nose. Sun hauling half a ton of limestone before sunrise is a fool's errand. Caleb's scar twitched. I've carried heavier. Evelyn squeezed his fingers beneath the tabletop part, restraint part prayer. She cleared her throat. We can't move the rock, but we can move eyes. If we bring the judge to the cavern, he'll stand on county record older than his robe. Judge Coleman leave a secure encampment doubtful. Rawlins sighed. Make him, Evelyn said, by light or by conscience. Silence. Outside thunder muttered in the hollows. It was Jessie, the smaller twin, who shattered the hush, padding into the room in striped nightshirt, clutching a wooden horse Caleb had whittled the day before. He made a beeline for Caleb, climbed onto his lap, and tucked his face against the mountain man's neck. Scared of bangs, he mumbled. Caleb's big hand cupped the boy's back. I know, he whispered. Me too. Something in that quiet admission shifted the air. Pragmatic talk dissolved into raw human stakes. Reverend Morrow exhaled a shaky breath, as though reminded that spiritual warfare sometimes rode on earthly wagons. All right, the pastor said, voice gentled but firm. We testify at dawn. If Coleman wants to fire a Gatling at a widow and her children after first-hand witness, he can answer to the Almighty. Plans rolled quick as dice. Rawlins drafted a formal demand for an on-site boundary inspection. Doc Wilkins prepared medical affidavits detailing Pinkerton arson injuries. The ranchers offered wagons, ropes, and teams to ferry any necessary physical exhibits. Widow McCabe brewed pitch-black coffee by the gallon, while townsfolk trickled up the slope with donations, smoked ham lantern oil, a stack of broadside flyers from the newspaper press, reading Save Burke Ridge, Truth Before Timber. Midnight found Evelyn in the battered barn skeleton lantern dangling from a rafter stub. She rearranged dynamite crates behind charred feed bins, last resort thunder should the militia ignore paper. Sweat streaked her temples, though night air had cooled. Every flicker of the lantern birthed phantom flames in her peripheral vision, echoes of Vaughn's torch job. She swallowed and kept stacking fuses in orderly bundles, the way Owen taught her patience when tying fly lines. Footsteps crunched. Caleb ducked under the jagged door-lintel moonlight, glancing off his scar. He carried 2 mugs. Chicory's bitter warmth steamed between them. He set one beside her crate and knelt. McCabe's worried dynamite might spark revival him, he said. She'd prefer tea and prayer. Evelyn forced a smile. Caleb tapped his sling. Doc had insisted on immobilizing his shoulder another day. Doc says if I swing an axe tonight, he'll strap me like a hog for slaughter. Doc's the only man you listen to. Caleb's eyes softened. Listen to you, too. You said grief's candle lights the path. Tonight path feels steep. She brushed hair from his brow. Steep paths lead to high views, Owen used to say. He nodded once as swallowed. I think your husband's voice is inside me, same as that cave stone, old stubborn refusing burial. Evelyn's chest fluttered. Do you know why no? His whisper barely stirred the ash-scented air. But when I close my eyes, I see him lying beneath timbers, pushing that phrase into my bones through dream. Forever starts at sunrise. Tears pricked her lashes, she let them fall. Sunrise is close. Caleb rested his forehead against hers uninjured hand, cradling her cheek. If dawn burns us down, know I found light again, because you bought a monster for $1. She half laughed, half sobbed. Best bargain I'll ever make. Their lips met, gentle trembling, tasting of chicory and gunpowder promise. An hour before first light, Sheriff Rollins and the ranchers moved out wagons, rattling toward Collier Quarry, bearing lanterns and legal parchments. Reverend Morrow rode ahead, Bible underarm, his white horse, a solitary gospel verse against ink-blue horizon. Evelyn, Caleb, and Widow McCabe stayed with the twins, and Doc posting extra lookout atop the ridge trail. They watched distant torchlights waver, swallowed by canyon gloom. The minutes that followed felt suspended heartbeat time, insect hum louder than thoughts. Caleb sat on the porch whittling a slat of pine into shape of a feather. Evelyn paced, memorizing fuse lengths, dynamite positions, the exact heft of Owen's old revolver. Somewhere an owl hooted thrice, bad luck omen in Ozark lore. She lit another lantern. Down the valley, thunder not born of clouds rumbled wagon wheels or marching boots. She strained to listen. Then hoofbeats, a single rider racing up slope. Rollins burst from tree-line reins, slack hat missing. His horse, lathered eyes rolling. Judge is coming, he yelled before the animal even halted. Coleman ordered militia to stay put. Then he and Vaughn and a half-dozen guards took the North Road on horseback. Once a private inspection without townsfolk. Caleb stood. North Road dead ends at Swallow Fork. They'll have to cross the creek bridge one wagon at a time. Evelyn's pulse hammered. Bridge planks had warped after spring floods, barely wide enough for a single rig. She and Caleb exchanged a glance, bottleneck. Tell Reverend meet us at the bridge, she said. Rollins wheeled the horse, disappeared downslope. She turned to Widow McCabe. Keep the boys inside. If gunfire starts, crawl space. The elderly woman gripped Evelyn's wrist. You come back to those children here. Or send the sunrise to fetch me. Evelyn whispered and ran. Creek water chattered below rotting beams as mist coiled through sumac branches. Evelyn crouched behind a chestnut stump on the ridge's south side, revolver, loaded dynamite satchel at feet. Caleb lay prone 5 yards ahead, Winchester aimed across the bridge floorboards. His sling had come undone. Blood seeped slow through bandage, but his eye glinted iron. Pre-dawn gray seeped into the world, neither night nor morning, the hour when shadows forget which bodies they belong to. Hoofbeats approached, muffled by fog. The first silhouette emerged. Luther Vaughn reins, in one hand, lantern in the other. Behind, 4 guards' rifles slung. Judge Coleman rode last, draped in heavy coat, despite warm air pocket watch glimmering. Bridge planks groaned under their horses. Mid-span, Caleb racked the Winchester. The metallic clack cracked the hush like an axe blade. Halt! His voice echoed off Creek Gorge. Horses snorted. Riders jerked. Vaughn raised lantern. You in the brush, come out, show hands. Caleb stepped into full view. This bridge closed. Coleman peered through spectacles. Is that the prisoner? Evelyn rose behind stump sighting along revolver barrel. He's no prisoner. You are. She struck a match to twin fuses on the dynamite sticks, wedged beneath the bridge rail, only 5-inch leaders. No time for debate. Sparks hissed. Orange tongues licked powder. Vaughn's eyes bulged. "You insane, back your horses," Caleb barked. Judge Coleman paled wheeled mount. The guards scrambled. Hooves clattered boards. Fuses burned half their length. Caleb pulled Evelyn behind stone abutment. Wood shrieked. Boom bridge erupted in fire and water spray. Half the span collapsed, dumping 2 guards into frothing creek. Horses screamed, scrambling for footing on far bank. Vaughn clung by reins. Coleman's hat flew. Smoke belched into morning sky, turning rose gold. Caleb rose, coughing, Winchester steady. Inspection trail just got shorter. "You cross on foot now." Coleman dismounted, shaken but furious. "This is criminal. So is arson and extortion," Evelyn called. "Step forward with empty hands. We'll finish your inspection honest." Vaughn snarled, drawing pistol. Coleman grabbed his arm. "Enough blood. I'll see the land." They trudged through shattered plank debris, across creek stones, slick with moss, and climbed south bank under rifle escort from Caleb. Dawn ignited ridge crest in molten orange glory. Forever starts at sunrise, Evelyn thought, and this sunrise had come armed. 30 townspeople lined Burke Ridge Yard, dock reverend ranchers, mothers with flour dust on aprons, bearing lanterns like gospel lights. Sheriff Rawlins stood before the smokehouse, where Silas Crow glowered behind bars of broom handle and rope. On a table lay the rifle that fired barn flames, and a doctor's list of injuries to children, livestock, and land. Evelyn addressed the judge. "This is what Vaughn's claim buys." She gestured to barn ruins, Crow's Burns twins, clutching McCabe's skirts. "But the ridge still speaks." She unfurled the vellum rubbing. Coleman adjusted spectacles. "I require corroboration." "Then follow," Caleb said. He hefted his coil of rope, ignoring the fresh blood seeping down arm. Vaughn burst. "You trust a cave scribble over my company's deeds. I trust bedrock," Caleb replied. Judge Coleman studied Vaughn's pistol, sheriff's affidavits, and the woman with dynamite soot on her cheeks, who defended her children by nightfall flame. Something in his judicial marrow tilted. He nodded once. 80 feet into marble glass cavern. Reverend's hymns bounced eerie off walls. Lantern glow sugar-coated stalactites. Coleman's eyes widened at chisel marks at Elias Burke's weather-worn initials. Doc measured distances, sheriff log notes. At last, in damp hushes smelling of mineral ghosts, Coleman signed his temporary ruling on the vellum itself. Boundary stands as 1894 survey. Burke Ridge exempt from corporate harvest. Caleb Quinn remanded to county court for review. Bounty claims suspended pending investigation of Pinkerton misconduct. Vaughn's howl echoed longer than the judge's pen strokes. Coleman added in quiet voice to Evelyn, "Madam, my court cannot sanction dynamite diplomacy, but it appears the hills have already handed down their verdict." Outside, sun fully crowned the ridge painting, barn ruins gold. Quinn limped to porch children, tumbling around his legs like puppies. Evelyn thanked the townsfolk one by one, every handshake a new root anchoring her to soil she'd nearly lost. Reverend Morrow knelt by Jesse, offered a cedarwood whistle. "For when the wind scares you, blow twice. We'll come." Dawn light warmed their faces. Caleb turned to Evelyn, wiping ash from her cheek. Red-tail hawk cut the sky above riding thermals. "We held the line," he said. "No," she corrected, heart swelling. "We widened it, made room for tomorrow." He drew her closer. Amid charred timbers, broken bridge, and creek water, still rippling with blast waves, they kissed beneath sunshine, strong enough to melt grief's last icicles. The congregation cheered because some victories belong to everyone who shows up with hammer hymn or heart. But Evelyn barely heard. Caleb whispered against her lips' voice, steady, fierce, belonging entirely to this world at last. Forever starts at sunrise. She echoed matching breath to pulse sunrise, to promise rock to flesh, and sunrise is ours. The train from Fayetteville shuddered like a restless animal, iron wheels hammering autumn rails, as it cut past tawny soybean fields and ridges ablaze with scarlet maples. Through the window glass, Caleb Quinn watched dawn drag a blade of pink across the Ozark sky, splitting night from day the way fate had once cleaved his life in two. He flexed the healed shoulder beneath his homespun coat. Doc Wilkins' stitches were months gone, yet ghost pain pulsed whenever thunder rolled or memory bit too deep. Ahead lay Pine Hollow, the town that had tried to barter his freedom for company coin. Behind lay the Fayetteville courthouse, where only yesterday 12 jurors, men and women who smelled of ledger ink and city coal smoke, voted unanimous to clear him of every charge. The decision tasted like creek water on a July noon cold, shocking and sweeter than any liquor. Still as the locomotive hissed into the valley station, Caleb's pulse thudded a foreboding rhythm. Pardons were parchment, belonging was bone. He wondered if Burke Ridge would truly claim him after the dust of trial settled. A whistle shrieked. Steam billowed wreathed platform lamps. Then through the drifting cloud he saw Evelyn Cotham, whipping in the October wind, cedar ring hand clenched around two wriggling boys. The twins waved frantically, fresh-mended barn looming behind them, like a sentinel rib cage of pale new pine. Caleb's boots were on the cinder verge before the train settled. Jesse launched first, James a heartbeat behind. Their small bodies thudded into his chest. He swung them in an arc that set the world spinning. The boys' laughter rising above the engine's dying sigh. Evelyn reached them, cheeks flushed rose gold. She pressed her palm to Caleb's jaw. He bent, kissing the pulse point at her wrist, where cedar fragrance clung. The ring there felt warmer than human skin. "You came back," she whispered. "Court could bind me to papers, couldn't bind me away from you." Her eyes glistened. Behind her, Widow McCabe dabbed tears with a lace handkerchief. Sheriff Rollins kept polite distance, hat over heart revolver, gleaming for decorum. Reverend Morrow tilted his Bible as if weighing a fresh parable. Home, Jesse demanded, tugging Caleb's coat. "Show Pa the pumpkins." "Pumpkins' first vows," later Evelyn said, slipping her fingers through Caleb's. Together they walked the half-mile track to Burke Ridge autumn leaves, crunching like brittle toast beneath boots. The rebuilt barn smelled of cut cedar, linseed oil, and raw hope. Sunbeams speared through high vents, illuminating fat orange pumpkins stacked like artillery along the east wall. Caleb ran work-rough palms across smooth rinds. Each gourd bore a finger-length slash, Evelyn's private tally marks, for every night he'd spent in jail awaiting trial. 11 slashes, 11 nights she'd stoked the stove alone, while wind pawed the shutters. "Next year we paint leaves instead of notches," she murmured. He traced the newest slash, a pale scar already drying to parchment. "Next year we carve them into lanterns and burn whatever there is to fear." Outside the barn, neighbors hammered final nails into rafters, a community raising that began the moment Judge Coleman's verdict hit town telegrams. Even Vaughn's ex-clerks swung hammers, eager to wash their hands of the timber baron's ruin. Doc Wilkins oversaw beam alignment, spectacles flashing. Deputy Sarah Lee kept time with a carpenter's chalk line. Music drifted from Widow McCabe's gramophone, ragtime reel turning work rhythm into dance. Lunch arrived as cast-iron kettles of venison stew. They ate at trestle tables under a sycamore, whose leaves fluttered gold as wedding confetti. Reverend Morrow tapped a spoon to his cup, clearing throat. "Friends, today we mend more than lumber, we mend a family. Court freed a man, but God freed a future." He gestured for Evelyn and Caleb to stand. Murmurs stilled. The twins clasped hands, eyes wide. "Will you, Evelyn Claire Burke, take this man, Caleb Elias Quinn, to share dawn and dusk, soil and seed, fire and storm?" Evelyn's voice wavered, but words rang, "Sure, I will, with cedar stone and sunrise." "And you, Caleb, will you take this woman, I take her?" Caleb cut in rumble, laced with awe, "With every breath I owe the hills and every heartbeat her boys loan me." Laughter bubbled, mingled with tears. Reverend Morrow raised calloused palms. "What ridge joined may no court sever. In witness barn beams, pumpkin rows, and the scars we wear like maps." Applause thundered. Sheriff Rollins whooped so loud a horse spooked. Widow McCabe cried freely, her hobnail boots splashing stew broth. Caleb kissed Evelyn, full lingering, while afternoon sun poured over them like warm molasses. Weeks turned. Ridge life unspooled a new rhythm. Each dawn, Caleb rose before rooster, walking fence line with Jesse, teaching the boy to read hoof prints, deer fox, prowling raccoon. At breakfast, he planned winter rye rotations while James pestered him for stories of cave echoes and runaway trains. Evelyn stitched quilt squares from old morning dresses, dyeing fabric indigo and rust. At night, she and Caleb laid squares on the kitchen table, mapping color like counties until patchwork resembled twilight sky. But peace bore echo of distant boots. Late November, cold crept early, and with it came rumors Vaughn's Chicago investors looked for fresh foremen to revive logging claim. Sheriff reported Pinkerton scouts spotted on North Ridge. Caleb checked rifle locks and sharpened plow blades, tools of growth, doubling as weapons if darkest hour demanded. One frost-bitten dawn, Evelyn found him at the creek, rolling Jasper River stones into burlap sacks. Flood wall, he said. Pinkertons try crossing current'll buck them sideways. She touched his unbandaged shoulder. We can't live every season expecting siege, not fear preparation. He lifted a dripping stone. Water rises even when men don't. Perhaps he was right. That week an early snow blanketed Boneback Ridge. Under night's hush, a rifle cracked, single shot echoed like splitting timber. Caleb bolted from bed, hauled Winchester, and vanished into swirling white. Evelyn followed barefoot but found only snow-muffled silence and tracks of a fleeing jackrabbit. Fear, she realized, can mimic gunfire inside a heart too newly healed. By the hearth, he wrapped her feet in blankets, murmuring guilt. She stroked his scar, whispering vows of patience. Warriors heal slower than flesh allows. Christmas arrived on sleek gray clouds, but the barn glowed hearth warm. Strings of cranberries draped rafters. Widow McCabe's lemon pound cake perfumed air. Deputy Sarah strummed a weather-worn guitar. Ranchers stomped clog patterns onto plank floor. Caleb surprised everyone by joining Doc in a two-step reel, his boots awkward yet determined laughter spilling like creek rapids, freed of winter ice. At midnight, Reverend read Luke's manger passage. Children held tallow candles, wax dripping onto mitten cuffs. When the final amen rose, Caleb pulled Evelyn aside beneath mistletoe nailed to a beam. I have a present, he murmured. From his coat, he drew a folded parchment, hand-inked map of Burke Ridge, with each field labeled, each irrigation ditch he planned for spring. He'd even sketched a small schoolhouse rectangle near the creek. Boys need learning bigger than ridge tales, he said, thumb-tracing the tiny drawing. And you need room for stories you'll write when field chores lighten. She pressed map to her heart. You mapped the future. Mapped hope, he corrected. Future we draw together. Snow whispered against roof shingles. She kissed him, fierce, soft, eternal. Fire crackled. Fiddle sang. Outside, the ridge slept beneath moon and snow quilt, but inside, hearts flared summer warm. January thaw turned paths into chocolate mud, and courthouse mail arrived. Vaughn accepted plea 5-year sentence. In state penitentiary, corporate charter revoked. Pinkertons withdrew claims, citing unfavorable terrain and armed populace. Sheriff framed the letter, hung it in McCabe's store for all to gloat. Evelyn breathed easier, yet Caleb seemed restless, eyes drifting to Backbone Peaks, ears pricking at wind. One dawn, he saddled the gray mare and packed jerky. Need to fetch something, he said. She frowned. Court settled. Not court, a promise. He tapped his scar. Oh, a voice. She understood the girl he saved at New Hope Saloon, whose testimony cleared him. He rode 2 days. She churned butter anxiously till his return. When hoofbeats finally clopped over the repaired bridge, a young woman sat behind him, holding a burlap sack of herb seedlings. This is Darcy Shaw, Caleb introduced. She lost family to Vaughn's goons, wants soil of her own. Evelyn fed Darcy soup, offered loft space. Within weeks, Darcy dug rows beside Evelyn's tomatoes, laughter ringing dauntless. Burke Ridge, it seemed, had room for more wounded hearts seeking sun. April planted dogwoods with cotton candy blooms along fence lines. Caleb edged fields with new irrigation channels. Water glimmered like ribboned glass. On a warm Saturday, he led Evelyn and the boys to Marble Glass Cavern, the first return since the glyph rescue. Jesse fretted about cave monsters until Caleb lit a lantern and promised ghosts only feared laughter. Inside the great chamber, sunlight speared through the ceiling crack they'd escaped, illuminating the stalagmite like a cathedral altar. Evelyn traced the initials again, Beer, CQ, and beneath them, Caleb produced a steel chisel. Your turn, he said, handing the tool and a wooden mallet. Palms sweaty, she kneaded chisel edge into damp mineral just below the arrow line. With a tap-tap rhythm guided by his steady hand, she carved 2 new letters, J and J, for children born of grief and rebirthed in hope. Lantern glow flickered across wet stone, making letters shine as though breathing. Jesse squealed. James declared it treasure map. Caleb wrapped arms around Evelyn. Drip water applause echoed them out of the cavern. Summer returned with cicada anthem. The schoolhouse foundation took shape under volunteer hammers, while Evelyn's indigo quilt stretched across rails for final backing. Twilight found her on the porch rocker twins, asleep in blanket cocoon at her feet. Caleb hauled a crate of peach preserves, wiping sweat. Doc says your pumpkins may set state records, she teased. Pumpkins only know sun and water. He sat beside her gaze, drinking horizon. Fireflies winked like scattered embers. Never thanked you proper. For what buying a broken man and paying with belief. She threaded fingers through his. Belief is cheaper than dynamite and burns longer. He laughed a deep rumble that vibrated rocker slats. Truth. He produced the harmonica, played a slow tune that drifted over rye stalks. She hummed harmony, nightbirds joined. When music quieted, he said, "Tomorrow's sunrise marks 1 year since you laid dollar on auction block. Want to ride the ridge edge with me and watch light climb out a valley?" She nodded. At dawn, they rode mare and mule to Devil's Backbone Overlook. Mist pooled below like spilled cream. Chickadees practiced spring overtures. As eastern sky blushed lavender, then tangerine, Caleb dismounted, knelt, and pressed palm to earth. "Remember first words I spoke?" She shivered. "Can't lose the light again. I thought they were Owen's. Maybe they still are. But today they're mine pledged that whatever shadow comes, I'll drag light into it or break trying." Sun-breasted peak gilding his scar, her cheek the horizon quilt of fields. She placed cedar ring hand over his heart. "And I'll cup that candle with both hands," she vowed, voice trembling with joy. He rose, pulled her against sunrise warmth. Twins whooped below Widow McCabe, let them chase dairy calf up lane. Roosters crowed, creek sang. Ridge pulse thrummed like drumline of seasons unfurling. "Forever starts at sunrise," Caleb whispered. Evelyn inhaled gold-scented air, the aroma of loam cedar and dawn. "Forever," she answered, started the day the ridge spoke. "Now we simply keep it talking." They stood side by side, silhouettes etched against a sky that promised storms, harvests, perhaps battles yet unknown, but always another dawn. And as the sun scaled full, Burke Ridge answered in birdsong, river shine, and the hush of rock, holding names forever cut into its ancient heart. Chapter 8. Sunrise on Burke Ridge. The Fayetteville verdict echoed through the Ozarks like church bells rolling down hollows. But for Caleb Quinn, the real absolution arrived in the hush after the train's last steam hiss died. When he stepped off the platform past the tar soot smell of coal and into the crisp bite of October Pine Hollow, was waiting lanterns, swinging fiddles tuning, and Evelyn Burke in a patched wool coat 2 shades darker than her blush. He made it 3 strides before the twin slammed into his knees. Jesse's arms locked around his thigh with surprising strength. James climbed higher, fistfuls of Caleb's collar clutched like reins. Evelyn reached them, fingers trembling against his cheek, eyes glassy but bright as hammered copper under station lamps. "I'm home for good," he said. "Soft promise, not boast." The words cinched the last frayed cord binding him to county warrants and bounty posters. Sheriff Rawlins cleared his throat, tipping hat brim in wry salute, and Reverend Morrow murmured a psalm of thanksgiving. But Caleb heard only Evelyn's ragged inhale, like lungs relearning ease. "Trumper, a ridge gets ready for vows." In the fortnight that followed, the valley moved as if roused by brass band. McCabe's mercantile offloaded bolts of calico and coarse lace. The blacksmith's wife measured Caleb's shoulders for a borrowed coat. 4 ranch hands raised new rafters on the half-burned barn, so lightning bug strings could be nailed high for a wedding feast. Every nail pounded seemed to echo the ridge's verdict. Stay, build, root. Evelyn supervised with ledger in one hand, rolling pin in the other. At dawn, she kneaded 6 rounds of sweet milk dough. By noon, she was on ladders, stringing corn shuck garlands. After dusk, she copied guest names into a school copybook Owen once joked was too clean for frontier life. She crossed out names of those buried or moved away, but kept writing, adding Blackwell widows from the low ridge and the old Chickasaw midwife who had delivered half the valley. Caleb found her one night asleep over the ledger quill, still ink wet between fingers. He lifted her, carried her to bed, and in candlelight traced the cedar ring he'd carved, confirming it still fit, despite the day's work swelling her hands. When the sun crawled up again, he slipped away shouldering an axe to fell dead cedar that threatened the new barn roof. Chips flew, sweat stung his healed shoulder. Each swing drove the echo of courtroom gavels further into memory until the axe thunked through bark and the tree thundered down exactly where he'd aimed, neat, final, righteous. He could almost hear Evelyn Burke grunt approval from beyond the ridgeline. The wedding night. 22 days after the verdict, in the tender gap between autumn and first frost, the barn's new siding smelled of pine pitch and wet paint. Lanterns bobbed under rafters, lighting plank tables laden with Widow McCabe's beet pickles, Reverend Morrow's persimmon pies, and a copper wash tub filled with applejack that could light a stump. The service itself was simple. Rollins polished his badge just to reflect extra candlelight, but otherwise left the glory to Reverend Morrow, who stood on a crate so everyone could see over the pumpkin stacks. "Grace is the spine of any good house," the Reverend intoned. "We patch the roof, we raise the beams, but grace holds it plumb." He looked at Evelyn. "Will you, by grace, receive this man who once carried a darkness as heavy as the timber that killed your husband?" "I will," she said, steady enough to still fiddle strings. Reverend turned to Caleb. "And will you, by grace, receive this woman who paid a silver dollar to buy back hope from despair?" With every sunrise, Caleb answered, voice deep, carrying past the doors. Evelyn slipped the cedar ring onto Caleb's scar-rough finger. He slid a plain silver band hammered from an old teaspoon onto hers. Morrow lifted his Bible, booming, "What the ridge has joined, let neither Pinkerton, nor timber baron, nor winter tear apart." Someone struck up leather breeches. The barn floor trembled under reels and two steps. Evelyn danced first with the twins, who hot-footed until cheeks shone like Macintosh apples, then found herself spun into Caleb's arms. He moved clumsily at first, but rhythm seeped into scar and sinew until they glided as if born to the grain of each other's bones. Outside, a hunter's moon, amber as fresh split cedar, raised itself over Devil's Backbone. Its light spilled into every knothole and new nail bend, blessing wood and vow alike. Winter trials. But marriage does not insulate against wind. November's breath cut early. First snow rode shotgun on a thunderfront, pelting the creek bridge until fresh planks groaned like old ribs. One night Caleb jolted awake, hearing phantom hoofbeats, memories of bounty hunters thundering through the pines. He grabbed the Winchester, feet crunching frost as he raced outside. Only wind and snowflakes greeted him. Evelyn found him standing shirtless under swaying moonlight, listening to something long fled. She pressed a quilt around his shoulders, guiding him back inside. "Dream tracks," he muttered, shame tinting his cheeks. She kissed the scar at his collarbone. "Dreams are tracks that fade by dawn. Let them." Still the ridge refused hibernation. Coyotes tested chicken coops. Ice snapped the hand pump chain. Caleb pounded iron at McCabe's shed forge to fix the pump handle, returning with soot-dark face and frost-stiff beard that tickled Evelyn's neck when she tried to scold him for risking a chill. When December sun dipped before supper, Evelyn lit the lamp early, reading school primers aloud so the boys might know letters beyond ridge runes. Caleb built desk benches from leftover cedar slats, carving each child's name, James Jesse, in block letters that smelled of hope, not death row graffiti. And in the deepest hush of the winter solstice, they sat by the hearth floor, scattered with wood shavings, and talked about planting an orchard. Apple saplings, plum, maybe even peach, though the ridge soil ran thin with limestone. Caleb traced orchard rows on the quilt top. Evelyn dotted where a spring house could keep cider cool. Plans blossomed like indoor lilies chasing warmth. Pinkerton echo. The militia's return. The thaw came early, but with it rumors, a replacement foreman from Kansas City sniffing around Collier Quarry. Two Pinkerton riders spotted at the general store asking about the big fellow with a face like carved hickory. Sheriff Rollins telegraphed the governor. Newspapers in Little Rock picked at the old scandal like vultures on a stump. One cloudy March afternoon, Caleb found a fresh boot print outside the garden fence heel, worn tread cross, hatched in Chicago pattern. He touched the rim, reading it like scripture. Some old tremor ran his spine. That night, Evelyn caught him packing a burlap sack, jerky water flask, revolver, harmonica. "If they're here, they'll try to torch proof or kidnap leverage," he said. I run a patrol line tonight. Evelyn's pulse thudded. You go, I follow. They saddled the mule and the mare, riding silent arcs along property markers. Coyotes yipped. Twice Caleb dismounted, studying disturbed leaves, broken twigs, a second boot print pointing toward the southern swale. When dawn leaked gray over pines, they found the Pinkertons, but not how they'd feared. Two men in dusters lay half-buried beneath a rock slide, horses gone, rifles snapped. Winter freeze had loosened a shale shelf. Greed paid the toll. Caleb checked pulses, both cold. He exhaled something halfway between relief and grief. They reported to Rollins, who hauled bodies to the quarry gate. Word spread fast. The Kansas City foreman pulled stakes within a week, muttering about cursed ridges and widow dynamite cults. The valley exhaled, snowmelt surging bright through Burke Creek. For Urinur. Spring rebirth. April gilded everything. Trillium-crowded creek banks. Dogwood splayed white petals like pages of unwritten hope. Caleb plowed furrows with the twins perched on muleback, each boy yelling, "Gee" or "Haw" far too often. Evelyn sowed tomato seeds, burying them thumb-deep the way Owen once taught. At night they slept with windows open. Frogs serenaded from pooled ruts. The ridge hummed. One star-clotted midnight, Caleb woke Evelyn with a soft nudge. Come. They padded barefoot outside. Fireflies blinked low, but higher on the repaired bridge, lanterns ringed posts forming a glowing path across the creek. Caleb led her hand in hand, stopping midway. Water murmured beneath reflecting torchlight, so the planks seemed to hover upon molten gold. I figured when dynamite blew the first bridge, we crossed a river we couldn't uncross, he said. So I built this sturdy enough for futures. He knelt, moonbeam silvering his braid, and opened a small cedar box. Inside lay the teaspoon silver band he'd hammered for their vow, but now flanked by two smaller rings shaped from twisted willow bark. For the boys, he said, voice husky. When they're ready, they'll carve these in stone like we did our names. Tears blurred the dance of lantern flames. She whispered yes because there was no other word. Sunrise anniversary. The one-year mark rose with a sky so clear it felt new-minted. Evelyn and Caleb climbed Devil's Backbone before dawn, mule loaded with blanket coffee pot and 2 slices of persimmon pie. They sat on the ledge where they first breathed, unafraid of Vaughn's guns. Below, blue mist pooled like rivers of smoke across black spruce and white oak. Caleb poured coffee. Steam spiraled skyward. When the first rim of sun breached the horizon, he set down his cup, took her hands, and spoke the words now, etched into ridge legend. Forever starts at sunrise. She answered through tears and laughter interwoven. And sunrise keeps coming, stubborn as our hearts. They watched light flood the valley, painting the rebuilt barn, the still charred stump that once housed dynamite, the creek bridge alive with golden shimmer. Birds erupted in chorus. A fox trotted along the meadow edge. Somewhere the twins' voices echoed, chasing calf and mourning both. Sun warmed their faces, and Caleb knew, not by court seal nor preacher's crate, nor bullet scar, that the ridge had claimed him. Stone kept memory, soil kept promise, sunrise kept forever. And in that radiance, Burke Ridge spoke once more, not in English but in wind through cedar water over limestone, and hearts beating side by side like twin hammers forging one future. Epilogue. Seasons yet to turn. Years spilled forward like the creek in spring flood, carrying silt seed and stories. By the second summer after the verdict, the orchard Caleb sketched onto quilt squares stood shoulder high. Rome beauty apples, reddening in July. Heat plums, fat as a child's fist. Peaches fuzzy with promise. Evelyn taught the twins to graft scions, slicing bark with care instead of fear. They giggled when sap bled beads of amber the bees adored. September brought the first cider pressing. The whole valley arrived, jugs in hand, to taste the ridge, distilled sweet sharp, laced with cedar smoke from the press fire. Sheriff Rollins declared it finer than any store liquor. Reverend Morrow christened the press with hymn and hammer, nailing a tin sign that read, "Light as a fruit we crush for joy." When autumn golded the dogwoods again, the one-room schoolhouse opened its green paint door. Darcy Shaw, now Miss Shaw to her pupils, rang a brass bell at dawn, and children came scrambling from ridge and holler shoes tied with twine. Lunch pails clanking. Caleb built their desks. Evelyn stacked primers and slates. Jesse scribbled maps of imaginary kingdoms, while James carved initials into inkwell cutouts. At recess, laughter flew up like chimney swifts, carrying the certainty that learning could claim ground, even dynamite could not. Seasons did what they always do, turn tested resumed. Lightning split the big oak one July, but Caleb milled the fallen half into floorboards for a future dance hall. A January ice storm snapped telegraph lines, yet Widow McCabe's store stayed open by lantern, and neighbors skied down the frozen slope with barrels of salt pork for anyone whose larder ran thin. Threats came too, an oil prospector, a drifter with a grudge, but none lasted under the combined gaze of a town that had once stared down Gatlings without blinking. On the evening of the third anniversary, Evelyn stood where she had first seen Caleb's shackled silhouette. Main Street's summer fair lanterns strung like captured comets. Music spilled from every doorway, yet her ears tuned only to a low familiar hum. She turned to find him at her shoulder, eyes reflecting carnival flame voice humming leather breeches. He carried no chains, now only a baby girl asleep against his barrel chest, Ruth Light Quinn born at sunrise 9 weeks earlier. As fireworks haloed the sky, he pressed the sleeping child into Evelyn's arms, wrapped both in his own, and whispered the family creed one more time. Forever starts at sunrise. And Evelyn, surrounded by all the bright miles they'd trudged, answered with the final truth the ridge itself seemed to sing, and sunrise keeps coming.